let's try it again. This is easily the most hardest album review that I've ever done. We are finally here. I've been doing chronologically album reviews of the whole Beach Boys discography, and I'm now at the classic Pet Sounds, the album that was released in 1966 and is a lot of times considered one of the top 3 albums of all time. And I am scared. I even have a cheat sheet, which I never have. It's not a script, but just a few points. I wanted to find a perspective or something to say that hasn't been said already or written already about this album. I watched all the album reviews that you can watch of this album from YouTube. I read a lot about it, and I even refreshed my memory, watched some movies, which I have seen already a dozen times, but been reading a book, So I've been studying quite a lot. And it's not like this is a new album for me, no. I know this from start to finish. I have some supplementary materials over here. I feel like a kindergarten teacher, but I like to have something to show to you. I saw Brian perform this album live here with Al Jardine almost 7 years ago in Royal Albert Hall. I think like 5 times or something like that, so I'm not sure if you can see it that well because of the reflections. But probably if you're watching this video, you either are a subscriber of mine. If you're not, you know what to do. You're a huge fan of it and you just want to hear me praise it. And then there are also other group of people who think it's overrated. And I think it's fair to say that, you cannot say that it's underrated because it's usually considered one of the top 3 classic albums of all time. So, it's not underrated. No. You can say that about any other Beach Boys albums, but not about Pet Sounds. It's a timeless piece of work. The music, thematically, lyrically, musically, the compositions, the way it's produced, the whole thing is somehow it kind of like just exists in its own bubble. It doesn't really sound like the mid-60s music. And I don't think it's fair to compare it too much for other albums. For example, the Beatles. I think it's kind of boring to compare it to the Beatles because their music sounds completely different from the Beach Boys music. And the Beach Boys, even though Brian was very highly influenced of Rubber Soul and the Beatles music in general, you don't really hear that influence at all on this album. It sounds completely different. A lot of times there are a few misconceptions about this album that I want to try to correct. First being that this is somehow a departure in style musically and lyrically for the Beach Boys in their catalog, which is not true. If you listen to Today, which was released a year prior to this one, or even some songs on Summer Days and Summer Nights album, they are just complete precursors of Pet Sounds style. So I think it's more like a natural evolution, the way the music sounds over here. It's not a departure at all, which it always just buckles me, like, who made that up? It just doesn't make any kind of sense. It's not like they were making surf music and then suddenly this came out. If you listen to all the albums chronologically, you can hear the evolution. So that's like one major thing that bugs me a lot. And there's also there's a lot of misconceptions about this album but one other thing that bugs me a lot is the way it just throws into shadows the other Beach Boys. A lot of people still write, for example, into like my videos to the comment section that the other Beach Boys couldn't play instruments. They didn't even play on their own records, and Dennis couldn't play drums, and only Brian was the musically talented guy of the group, and all that bogus that doesn't make any kind of sense in the 80s and the few late albums that they did. They relied a lot of times on session musicians mostly. But in the 60s, they mostly played their own instruments, and the Wrecking Crew is playing here, that's true. And I think it's great that they have got their a recognition finally, and they are very well respected and recognized for their work in the 50s and 60s and you know throughout the decades. That's great. They deserve it. Somehow, some people have kind of forgot that the Beach Boys actually are. They were a lot more than just Brian's like puppets. So you know, like they put out so much great music in the 70s, and if you're not familiar of any of that stuff, go and listen. You are gonna be amazed. I think that's enough for an introduction. Let's just do this like this, you know, in the same way that I always do these reviews, which is first I talk about the artwork and then we just dive into the tracks one by one. I completely dig the album cover. I never thought that it was bad. I always just loved it. I think it's just groovy. I love the font, you know, that Cooper typography, and it's ironic, you know, because the music, it doesn't really represent the music at all. But that's why I love it, because it's just so, it's iconic. It just is. The guys all look cool, you know, they have great clothing, hairstyles, everything. It just works. The back cover I'm not that big of, you know, fan of, but you know, it's great to see them on their Japan tour over here. And there's a great picture of Bruce Johnston showing Dennis Wilson on piano some chords. So this is basically like the beginning of Dennis Wilson, the composer, and nobody knew at this point how great of a composer and, you know, talented guy he was. It's great to have him you know, documented over here. And all these great pictures, and there's Brian on piano, because he wasn't on that tour, he was making this album while they were in Japan. But you know, it's kind of a messy back cover, I think. But the front cover, I love. Let's now dive straight into the songs. The album starts off with Wouldn't It Be Nice? And for the longest time, well, I'm gonna go all over the place. What the heck? This album, for me, was kind of hard to understand. It's not like I disliked it the first time I listened to it. I knew already Wouldn't It Be Nice, Sloop John B, and God Only Knows. So those three songs I've like grown up with. You know, I don't remember hearing those songs the first time. Like, you know, I've known them since I was a baby or whatever, you know. So I remember listening to this the first time thinking like, yeah, Wouldn't It Be Nice is cool and God Only Knows is cool. But it was kind of hard for me to get it. And maybe like a few months went by and I kept listening to it. And then I remember that it kind of flipped. That I started to understand the other songs. And then I didn't find Wouldn't It Be Nice, Sloop John B and God Only Knows anymore that interesting, you know. You've heard those songs thousands of times and in different movies and stuff. So it's like, you know, you sometimes just forget how great they are, if you know what I mean. But Wouldn't It Be Nice is a perfect album opener. It's the most upbeat song on this album. But it's not a happy song, even though Brian says a lot of times that he just wanted to write a song about great joy. At least to me, probably the most interesting aspect of this album is the contrast with the seemingly happy sounding music with still some darker undertones in the compositions and especially in the lyrics. Because even a song like Wouldn't It Be Nice, which if you just read the lyrics, you know, fast, you might think like, okay, that's just a fun teenage love type of you know, track. But if you really think about it, at least the way I see it, it's much more than that. It's a wish for something that cannot exist, almost, like, you know. It's like, it's very naive. You Still Believe in Me. A great song. What a difficult song to sing. It's not like, I'm not a singer, but you have that a cappella part where you have like 15 notes on the same syllable. It's a great track. The lyrics reflect a lot on the similar situations that the Today album describes of. You Still Believe in Me, like most of the other songs on this album as well, are relationship songs. They are not your traditional, even God Only Knows, they are not your traditional love songs, so to speak. Instead, they have a lot of self-reflection and realizations of things that you are doing wrong, or the person that's singing is doing wrong, or he's even having like feeling anger towards another person. That's Not Me, the third track on this album, is a very sparse track instrumental wise. It is played mostly by the Beach Boys itself, so it's very different from the other tracks with the Wrecking Crew, and it's one of my favorite tracks on the album. The person in the song has moved out and to a city and trying a different life, and other people are saying to him that that's not who you are, and then the guy or whatever the person of the song is having self-doubts basically. I've experienced very similar scenarios, and I feel that probably a lot of people have, and that's one of the reasons why it is so great, and why it's easy to feel that song, emotionally. That's most likely the reason why this album has been gaining just, recognition throughout the decades. The songs just are, the way they deal with those, it has an emotional core that, anybody can really understand. And it's simple enough lyrically to comprehend, but the lyrics are not, they still are great lyrics, a lot of times people think that simple lyrics mean they're bad, but that's not the case here. They are very poetic, but they are just somehow very timeless, I guess, whatever that means. Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder. I really loved the way Brian did this song on his later tours, when he did this sort of Bob Dylan-esque vocal delivery on the lead vocal. Don't talk, put your head on my shoulder, come close your eyes, and be still. I really love that. But, I love this one as well, obviously. The melody on this track is so beautiful, and the lyrics, once again, they're simple. You get them immediately, and it is just so... it doesn't even really matter. A lot of these tracks, most of these tracks, work both ways. They work as they're released over here, finished, and they also work instrumentally, and they work a cappella. And what I find very interesting about these tracks is that if you do listen to them instrumental or a cappella, it's almost like you get three different songs. A lot of these tracks, when you take out the vocals, they kind of create their own mood, and then the vocals kind of have their own different thing. And when you put them together, you have a third song, so to speak. But because of the vocals with the harmonies and all that layering, they are so dense and they have a lot of depth. You can listen to them a cappella wise, and they sound great. And like I said, it's almost like an entirely different song. So I highly recommend you do that if you haven't. But yeah, Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder. Once again, that's one of my all-time favorite Beach Boys tracks. Probably in my top 3 tracks on this album. I'm Waiting for the Day is the most, it's not upbeat, but it's probably the mostly rocking track on this album, with the great timpani drums, and the whole composition is great. It has a lot of dynamics basically. It goes from very high and loud to very sparse. And once again, the situation, like lyrically, that story in the song is very, I feel a lot of anger with the storyteller of the song, like emotional frustration and anger, and It's almost like a like you could do a great Nine Inch Nails-esque cover of this song with different sort of instrumentation and production. Let's Go Away for a While is the first of the two instrumental tracks on the album. It's very exotic, kind of jazzy, soothing, and I love the way the instrumental tracks are paced on the album, because this is the second to last on side A, and it just gives a little time to breathe, because the Beach Boys vocals and the way they, and Brian especially, wrote the songs is they have a lot of vocals. There are very rarely parts in the songs where you kind of just get to breathe and you know, just like solos or stuff like that. There's not much of, you know, long instrumental parts usually in traditional Beach Boys music, and I just dig the way, and this album especially, it's just filled with great vocals and harmonies. But I love it that there are these two instrumental tracks that just give it a little, like I have to go back to the live show that Brian was doing with the Pet Sounds album. He always said before this song that now just close your eyes and listen to this track, and you know, there's no voices or nothing, and just creates a soothing atmosphere. A lot of people think that Sloop John B doesn't fit on the album, and while I somehow can understand that opinion, I don't agree with it. I think production wise and thematically it completely fits the album, and you know, I think it's a great song. It's one of those tracks that on the first place, and it just sounds so joyful, but when you actually think about the lyrics, it's kind of a sad track, and it's once again that contrast that works really well. But anyhow, when you flip the album, you get to God Only Knows, and as I mentioned, it just works so well when you listen to this on vinyl and you have that little space in between these tracks. Otherwise it can be a little bit jarring from Sloop John B to God Only Knows. But God Only Knows is the kind of track that I cannot really say a lot about. I think it's a perfectly written ballad. Lyrics, the composition, Carl's lead vocals, the backgrounds, the tag part, the whole thing is just a perfect mixture of sounds, and the emotional delivery of the lead vocal, and even the way Brian uses Bruce's voice at the end. I mean, I just cannot say really anything else about it. I know There's an Answer was previously known as Hang On To Your Ego, but Mike rewrote those lyrics, and I actually prefer the Mike written lyrics. I think they flow better, and it's just one of those songs that has a perfect melody, and the way the lyrics follow, or you know, just works so damn well. It's very hard to, I like to find something to criticize, or like when I do a review, I don't want to just praise the product. I always try to find interesting point of views and things to criticize as well, because not many things are perfect in this world, and I think it makes reviews interesting when you point things out that maybe are or could be somehow different, or whatever, you know, better, or whatever word you want to use. But as I mentioned, this album is different. It's very hard to find anything to criticize about this album. Here Today is a groovy rocking track. I love that instrumental part. It's just so great. It has a mood of its own completely. Lyrically, I think it might be the weakest on this album, which doesn't mean that it's weak, but I just think it has a different type of angle, and it works, but it's just different somehow. I Just Wasn't Made for These Times is one of the great Brian Wilson tracks, and if you can just point a song that's perfect, you know, this is it. There's just, I mean, the theremin, the whole thing, the production, Brian's vocals, it's so heartfelt, honest. What else can you say about it? It's just perfect. Then we are arriving at the end almost with the instrumental track Pet Sounds, which was originally called Run James Run, and Brian reused actually that great title later on his solo track. Well, it was like 6 years ago when he released that one. Yeah, it's one of the last tracks that he has put out lately. It's a great track. But the Pet Sounds track over here, the original Run James Run, is great as well. It's completely different though. Very exotic. It has a great surf guitar lead, almost like a solo or whatever, thing going on throughout the track, and the drums are great. It has different sections, and it just makes me wish that Brian wrote more, so to speak, film music. It was supposed to be on a James Bond film, or Brian wrote it for James Bond film, but they didn't want it, so he just put it out on Pet Sounds. And it works so well as a segue into Caroline No, which is for me, probably the biggest highlight of this album. It's a little song, just about 2 minutes long, very minimalistic, but it has haunting melody, instrumentation, the vocal delivery by Brian. It was released actually as his first solo single. Still, the best part, in a way, about this album for me is the ending sounds with the train and the dogs barking. The way those sounds work with the fade out of the tag of Caroline No. They evoke a very haunting, sad feeling in me. I don't really know what that is, but somehow it's hard. It's impossible to describe it in words. But when you listen to this album in dark and just by yourself, it's very hard not to get a little teary-eyed listening to that end. I think it works as a bookender in a way for the album, and it kind of brings the themes back to the beginning at the end. And it's not about Caroline cutting her hair, it's not about that woman, even though it might seem that way, but it's all about the subtext, and it's about the loss of that naivety or that naiveness. It's about realizing that things have changed. You have maybe changed, or maybe the world around you has changed and you're not, whatever that might be. I think it leaves a lot for the listener to interpret. But anyhow, I think it's about the experience of seeing, in Brian's case, if we go autobiographical, he married Marilyn when she was 16, and they were starting to have serious problems with their marriage around this time, and Brian started to use different drugs and have issues with those, and his mental issues started to rise, and he probably started to realize that maybe he did a mistake. I mean, they ended up divorcing eventually, but they were just kids, and then things were changing fast, and then you realize that you're losing something basically, and it's hard to cope with that change, and it's very hard to put it into words, but I hope you understand what I'm getting into over here, But what I love about this album and this song and all these songs is that you can interpret them in many ways. For example, for a lot of people, God Only Knows is the most beautiful love song ever, and they use it in weddings. And for some people, it's a very sad song. I mean, just if you think about the opening lyrics, I may not always love you, there's always that sort of Anyhow, I could go on and on and on, but I'm gonna let myself off the hook. It has been terrifying to talk about this album, and I hope I did even a little bit of justice for it. But as I mentioned in the beginning, even though I think it's the most solid piece of music the Beach Boys ever put out, I don't think it's my personal favorite. It depends, you know, if you ask me other day, I might say that it's my personal favorite, but right now, I'd probably say that my personal favorite is something from the 70s. I don't know. It's it's hard. They have so much great music. So if you haven't checked out the other Beach Boys albums and you only know this one, check them out. They are just as great as Pet Sounds. Each album that they did was different from the one that they did before. So, you know, you have so much great music over there. And you're missing out so much if you just know the surf songs, hits and Pet Sounds. You're missing so much. So, you know, do yourself a favor and check out the other stuff as well. And if you like this video and stuck around up until the end, I would love to know your comments on the album. Do you like it? Do you think it's overrated? Do you think it's underrated? Probably not, but you know, what do you think about it? Was it easy to understand? Did you love it immediately, or did it take some time like it did with me? You know, I needed some listens to get it. So anyhow, thanks for watching. Hopefully we'll see you soon again on the next one. Take care. Bye bye.